Jonathan Saenz, I'm president of Texas Values. We also have an organization that does a lot of advocacy and lobbying work called Texas Values in Action. So you'll see that name referenced on some of the handouts I'm going to give you. The first thing I want to do is update you on the religious freedom effort. There are a number of bills that are being proposed that were filed at the last minute, if you will, or towards the end of our filing deadline that are going to deal with some of these issues that's related to the marriage issue. And so we're working on getting those moving, but one that continues to get a lot of attention is the constitutional amendment that takes language from our current statute and from the federal level. It essentially has the language that they used in the Hobby Lobby court decision for religious freedom. How many of y'all are familiar with that? Okay, it takes that language and that test that the court uses to balance your religious freedom rights with the right of the government to take those rights away from you and puts them in our state constitution. Our concern is we passed a statute on religious freedom over 15 years ago. And a lot of the dynamics of issues of what religious freedom means has changed in a lot of people's minds. Our concern is if we have new battles come up, that people are going to look at our old statute and say some of these new issues don't apply to what the interpretation of what religious freedom was back then. And I want just for a second for y'all to, and I know this is a very smart group, but keep in context, when we talk about religious freedom and laws related to it, it means us being able to tell the government to stop doing something that punishes us for exercising our religious freedom rights. So to give you an example, we had pastors in Houston who had their sermons subpoenaed by the mayor of Houston. Okay? She's a government official. She ordered them or subpoenaed them and requested that they turn over their sermons because they were talking about issues that related to marriage and sexuality. So that's the government ordering them to do something where they will be punished. And you know, when you get subpoenaed, if you resist it, there is a potential that you could be held in contempt of court and go to jail. So we're not just talking about an opinion that the mayor had. We're talking about very big consequences. So, and I have some examples on a handout here that I'm going to pass around where you can see some of the things that have happened. We know about the cheerleaders in Coons, Texas, who put Bible verses on a banner for football games. The government is the school district. They're saying no to that. That case started over 3 years ago, or about 3 years ago, and is still being litigated. So what you heard about initially was the cheerleaders won, right? The government lost in that court case, but they appealed. Now it's before the Texas Supreme Court. Okay, and so we know of cases across the country too, where people of faith are simply saying that they disagree with the definition of marriage being redefined. Craig James, who's a former football player from the state of Texas, was on the campaign Senate trail and said he believed marriage was between one man and one woman. That's our current law. Well, years later, he goes to get hired by Fox Sports. He gets hired. A couple of months later, they find out he made comments on the Senate trail saying that his support of marriage, they thought that that was biased or prejudiced or insensitive, whatever their reasons were. Because of his statements about his religious belief on marriage, they fired him. He lost his job. What you hear a lot is folks on the left saying, no, these religious freedom laws are going to be used to discriminate against people that want to redefine marriage or are homosexual. I'm not seeing any evidence of that. What we're seeing is they're actually using those laws to attack people of faith. And that is when the government does not respect your religious freedom. So this bill is HJR 10, and one of the reasons I'm bringing it up is because we had a state elected official who had this legislation in the House, Jason Villalba. He decided to withdraw his own bill. I mean, I guess he made the conclusion that he didn't feel like he could support religious freedom in our state constitution. We're disappointed by that, but the bill was picked up by Matt Krause, so it's HJR 125. So you'll see this in the handout, and actually I'm a few short, but if you'll hand that out, and you'll see that. And so just so you know what this does, it gives us the right as Texans to vote at the ballot whether we think we need religious freedom language that has been approved by the U.S. Supreme Court and is almost identical to what we have in statute in our Texas Constitution, so we have more permanent protection if it's in the state constitution. We get to vote on it in November if this is passed. And all it says is that the government cannot, we're going to change the language too, it will not say that you cannot substantially burden someone's religious beliefs unless the government has a good reason. And I'm going to bring copies in just a minute of an editorial we got published in the Statesman over the weekend that cleans up and responds to the mischaracterization. Some people have said, oh, well that means people can use their religious freedom rights to engage in racial discrimination. No, they cannot do that. The Supreme Court has already said it's a compelling government interest. It's a good reason, enough for the government to say, no, you can't use your religion for that. Some people have said, oh, well, that means there may be people that have religious beliefs that they can control and manipulate and abuse their spouse, or they can engage in illegal domestic violence and use that as a religious reason. They can be physical towards them, and they can, hold them down. Whatever these ridiculous examples have been, if you're violating a criminal law, if you're violating domestic violence laws, you cannot use your religious freedom rights as protection. That has been determined as a compelling interest where the government has said, no, you're not going to win on that. So this is just a balancing test. It simply means that if the government comes after you because of your religious faith, you've got a fighting chance in court. It doesn't mean you'll win. It just means you get to actually make your case in court, and the government has to prove that they have a good reason for either punishing you, for forcing you to close your business, or for saying that you can't use say certain words about your religious beliefs in public. The other thing I want to bring to your attention, and my good friend Kathy Adams is going to follow up with this, but there is a bill being heard in State Affairs tomorrow on the marriage issue, and I've got a handout on that. Kathy's going to talk in more detail about that, but that's House Bill 1745. So that will be in committee tomorrow. So if you can either come and testify in support of it, or if you can sign up in support of House Bill 1745 by Cecil Bell, that would be fantastic. The other thing that I've got a handout on for you here is House Bill 3567, and this is about protecting the religious freedom of pastors, of ministers, of churches, and religious organizations. We have seen a growing effort on folks that want to redefine our marriage laws to not respect faith leaders. We saw that with the mayor of Houston who wanted to reach into the pulpit and subpoena sermons. We're seeing it in Idaho where two ministers, Christian ministers, were under the threat of a local law of having to be forced to perform a marriage that violated their religious beliefs. In the Church of England is under a legal suit. Two men have sued the Church of England to force them to perform the marriage of their choice, even though it goes against the religious beliefs of the church. That's House Bill 3567, and it simply makes clear that that you can't suffer from government civil or criminal persecution as a pastor, a priest, a clergy member, a minister. The government can't force you to perform a marriage ceremony that violates your religious beliefs. They can't put civil or criminal penalties on you. And so, it's really concerning when we think about, these are some of the real issues we're facing now, is whether or not we think the government is going to penetrate this area. But we're seeing examples of it in our own country and in some countries close to us that have similar models of how we do things. And so a legitimate concern there. And so that's House Bill 3567 by Scott Sanford. And we have a little booklet here too that I want y'all to, we've got copies in the back. I know many of y'all are familiar with the legislative process, but if you're not, you want to get a little booklet about where elected officials are located in the Capitol, how the process works. We have a guide here called the Texas Legislative Guide that shows you how to get involved and how to navigate around the Capitol. If you want to take a couple extra copies and share it with friends for a later date or for another trip, we're happy for you to do that. And so if you go to our Facebook page too, you can see updates on this, or if you go to our action website, txvaluesaction.org, you'll see that. And if you want to hear me talk more, you can listen on the radio at 12 o'clock on Saturdays. We have a new radio show called the Texas Values Report. We'll be updating weekly on this issue. You can see a link to it online on our website. But if you're in this area, Central Texas area, it's 11:20 a.m. and that's Saturday at noon to 12:30 on 11:20 a.m. So, any questions?
On the religious liberty amendment and some of the pushback on it, have any big business associations weighed in on it?
So, yeah, good question. So, there's the article that we're passing around, which is our response to this issue, highlights the fact that the Texas Association of Business, which is a pretty big business entity, if not the largest in our state, has now been very public about aligning themselves with groups that want to redefine marriage, they want to redefine family, and they want to attack our religious beliefs. That's Equality Texas, that's the ACLU, that's the Texas Freedom Network. These are very hard left, pro-homosexual, pro-abortion groups, anti-freedom groups, that now the Texas Association of Business that has said, They claim they're a conservative group, but they have publicly said, we're now aligning ourselves to oppose this religious freedom effort. And the reason they're doing it is because they think that folks that engage in homosexual behavior, their ability to do that and use the government to punish people that don't agree with that, they think that government power should trump your religious rights. They think the power for them to tell you how you should believe on this issue and how you should run your business should trump your religious rights. Even though Hobby Lobby at the Supreme Court level said that the government has limitations on what it can do to you as a private business owner. And the way this plays out, I'll just give you one example, is whether or not the government can force you as a business owner to create transsexual bathrooms. That either you have to create a new bathroom just for people that decide one day they're a woman and the next day they're a man, or however they go about their transition of changing genders, that you've got to come up with one bathroom just for them, or you have to allow them to pick which bathroom they want to use from one day to the next. We see businesses doing this, but Houston has an ordinance where they enforce this type of behavior by the government. San Antonio does too. And people will say, oh, well, that's really not how it's going to play out. Yes, it is. There's a school of cosmetology in San Antonio that was threatened with enforcement of their ordinance just in the past year. And as a result of that, this private business, not the government, a private business was under threat of this, so they changed their policy on this, and they ended up coming up with a bathroom for transsexuals. Well, the person that was threatening them with this attack and with this enforcement, they decided, you know what, I'm not going to apply there. I'm just going to go somewhere else. After the school, this private business made all these changes, and so we will see more of that. We will see private businesses being forced to do these things. We'll see, private businesses really having to decide whether or not they're going to follow their faith or close their business. And we see that with the cake bakers and the florists. And so there's a case out of New Mexico where a florist said, I will photograph a same-sex couple, but I don't want to be a participant in their ceremony and photograph that. That went up to the New Mexico Supreme Court, and the statute that they have on religious freedom was not enough to protect their rights. The government said that got trumped by this same-sex couple wanting to have those photographs taken, and they said that's the price of citizenship. That's one of our neighbors. And so the Texas Association of Business, though, has come out loud and proud, obviously, standing with Equality Texas, ACLU, and these really hard left groups that don't support our freedoms on this issue. So we've responded to that because our concern is, look, if businesses want to do what they want privately, that's a decision they make. It's a whole nother thing when the government starts telling you that you've got to do business just like someone else just because they have a different view on how this situation should work. We think that completely disturbs the business environment in our free marketplace, and at some point we're concerned that will be a burden on smaller businesses that don't have all the lawyers to fight all these issues, and they'll be in a situation where their business practices will either be dictated by larger businesses, so it'll stifle small businesses, or they'll just end up having to close. And so, which is really concerning for a group that says they're about supporting business, that they're supportive of trying to be against religious freedom. Our belief, it'll have the impact of actually stifling and be harder on business, particularly small ones. And so we have that in that article, we've highlighted that, but it just doesn't make sense. When you just had a Supreme Court decision with Hobby Lobby saying that businesses do have some religious freedom rights, this is clearly something apparently the Texas Association of Business thinks religious freedom is bad for business. Well, it's always been good for business, and it's always been good for Texas. So we want to keep that legacy. Thank you.